The Daggerheart team has released another set of playtest material, this time filled with adversaries and environments, where they provided 16 new adversaries and 4 environments for us to test out. Now, this struck me as odd for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I did find it a bit strange that they were playtesting monsters, not that I don't appreciate it, I do, but it's just not all that common. But secondly, and way more importantly, we're seeing quite a few D&D influences here, with some new adversaries that are more or less a beholder and a mind flayer. Anyway, we've got 4 new adversaries in each tier of play. I've picked one from each that really stands out to me, so we're going to discuss it because we're already seeing some very interesting evolutions in their monster design. Let's get into it. Really quickly before we do, I am currently under 1,000 subscribers away from hitting 20,000, and I'm hoping to do it by September 27th to make it under 1 year to get from 10k to 20k, which would be insane to me. So if you enjoy what I do and would like to help support the channel, subscribing and clicking the like button while you're there helps so much more than you probably realize. Thank you. First up in tier 1, we have the Mountain Troll. It's classified as a solo adversary, which is to say that it is intended to be able to challenge a party whether it has any support or not. Solo creatures are designed to be able to do multiple things and have a wider range of abilities and features so that they can push the limits of a party's capabilities. Mountain Trolls love to ambush from behind, attack from above, and really just pulverize and obliterate their enemies. Looking at their stats, it's pretty much on par with every other tier 1 solo. They've got 14 difficulty, thresholds at 815, 8 hit points, and 3 stress. Attack and damage values vary across creatures, but this one has some interesting tricks up its sleeve. Its first feature is Relentless 3. This means that a GM is able to activate the Mountain Troll 3 times during a single GM turn, provided that they do spend a fear for each activation. This is in stark contrast to the typical restriction of being able to only activate an adversary 1 time. Relentless is an extremely powerful feature and is a big part of why, as a solo creature, the Mountain Troll could be able to take on an entire party by itself. Relentless is a fairly common trait among solo creatures. For our next feature, we're actually going to skip Stolen Armor for a second for reasons that will become clear shortly, and instead move on to Flail Swipe. Flail Swipe allows the Mountain Troll to mark a stress to make an attack against all targets within very close range. So that's roughly within 10 feet. On a success, the troll deals 2d10 plus 3 physical damage instead of its typical 1d10 plus 3. Mechanically, this works by the troll actually only making one singular attack roll and comparing it against each other target within range, and not making one for each target. Notably, it also cannot use this ability while enraged, which brings us to our next feature, Stolen Armor. Stolen Armor is a passive, and the way that it works is quite interesting. What it does is at the start of a combat with the Mountain Troll, you begin a countdown equal to the number of players. If you don't know already, countdowns are essentially a way that the game uses to track progress on an activity or event or something else. The countdowns will progressively tick down on some trigger, and then they will eventually, when it reaches the end, it'll resolve and something is going to happen. So in this case, we set the countdown equal to the number of players, so for a table with 4 players, not including the GM, the countdown begins at 4. Then whenever the troll takes damage, the countdown ticks down by 1. When it reaches the end, the troll evolves and becomes an enraged Mountain Troll. Also, while the countdown is still active, anytime the troll marks hit points, the amount it marks is reduced by 1. So say a player dealt severe damage and caused the troll to have to mark 3 hit points, it would actually only mark 2 instead. One other note on this countdown is that it ticks down when the troll takes damage and not when it marks hit points. Mechanically, what this means is that if a player dealt minor damage causing the troll to need to mark 1 hit point, if the countdown is still active, it would actually mark 0 hit points, but the countdown would still tick down. Alright, let's talk about that evolution now. Once the troll becomes enraged, a few things change. First, it gains a +1 to their difficulty, going from a 14 to a 15. Notably, this makes it among the toughest creatures in all of Tier 1, as there's currently only one other adversary with a difficulty of 15, and that's the Head Guard, which is of the leader type, and its thresholds are considerably worse, and it even has 1 less hit points. So yeah, the Mountain Troll does not mess around once it's enraged. Next, its Skull Flail standard attack turns into Claw Swipe, dealing 1d8 plus 1 physical damage, so this is notably weaker than before. However, to compensate for that, it gains the Double Swipe action. This requires the GM to spend a fear for the troll to move within close range and immediately make 2 attacks against one target within melee range. If both attacks end up hitting, the damage is combined, so it becomes 2d8 plus 2, and the target also loses a hope. It's worth noting that even in their enraged form, the Mountain Troll still retains their relentless traits. So provided you have enough fear and are lucky enough with your attacks, you can be constantly depriving your party of a ton of hope with this ability. The Mountain Troll is quite a powerful foe, and I love seeing the expansion of the design framework. I could be mistaken, but I don't think there are currently any other creatures that have the evolution feature, so it is cool to see the team experimenting with it and it is a pretty iconic concept in a lot of RPGs. It can also give a sense of scale and dynamism to the game, where even as early as tier 1, characters are getting to experience phased battles, which can be extremely exciting, but also terrifying. I think I'd like to see a bit more out of the Enraged version, maybe another feature, but overall, I think this is looking like it's in a good place, and will definitely put on some hurt. Next, we're moving up to tier 2, and here we have the Beholder, sorry, no, not the Beholder, I meant the Gobstalker. Yes, the Gobstalker. The fleshy ball of teeth with 10 joint antennae rising from its crown, each bearing a different colored eye. So the Gobstalker. Jokes aside, I am confident they were intentionally being a little bit tongue-in-cheek about this. They're not even trying to hide it, really. I would have thought that Jeremy Crawford and Chris Perkins would have brought some new ideas, but here we are. Also, I can't think of the Gobstalker without thinking of those giant jaw and teeth destroying candies Gobstoppers. Maybe that's also the connection they were trying to make. Anyway, let's take a look at the stats. It has a difficulty of 15, thresholds at 10-20, 8 hit points, and 6 stress. This is definitely putting it on the less resilient side of things as far as tier 2 solos go. Admittedly, it has some other very strong abilities, but it's currently only matching the battle box as far as defensive stats go. As an aside, there really needs to be a ton more monsters in this game, so in that sense, it's good that we are getting more. I hope these 16 are just sort of templates for ideas, and they have a lot more to put out though. Anyway, it also does have a standard attack, which is, surprise surprise, a bite. It only deals 2d6 plus 3 physical damage, but you aren't really intended to be attacking with the bite all that often. So let's look at the features. First up, like we saw with the Mountain Troll, the Gobstalker also has Relentless 3, which means that it can be activated up to 3 times during a single GM turn, provided a fear is spent for each activation. Next, it has another passive, Anti-Mystico Halitosis, which is essentially an anti-magic field, except in this case, it's not coming from a centrally located eye, but rather it's coming from its centrally located mouth and takes the form of brutally rancid breath. The way this works is that any attack that deals magic damage or creates a magical effect in front of the Gobstalker and within close range just automatically fails. Now, this does raise a few questions, most notably what is considered magical. This is something that D&D players have struggled to answer forever, and now the same question has been ported over to Daggerheart. I guess the answer is just whatever the GM decides. Also, it just states in front and specifies close range, which is within 30 feet, so presumably this creates just one enormous square that is 30 feet in all directions, which is pretty massive. The other question I have is, what if a magical effect was created outside the range and then wanders into it somehow? Is it suspended or does it keep working, since it specifies that it only affects things that were created within the range? Also, it does specify attack, so does magic hand work? I don't know. This still raises a ton of questions that my D&D brain just wants answers to, most of which probably don't actually matter all that much, but I'm still curious what the intent was here. At least they tell us that it doesn't affect its own I-beams though. Speaking of I-beams, let's talk about those. To use an I-beam, it requires the GM to mark a stress just to attack a target within far range. On a hit, they then have to spend a fear to choose one of the beams, or roll a d10 to randomly decide. Did you catch the problem? I actually did not notice this until at least 2 or 3 reads in, so I would not blame you if you didn't. To use an eye stock requires marking a stress. Gobstalkers have a total of 6 stress available to them, and they also have the Relentless 3 passive, and are also required to spend a fear to activate an eye stock after a hit. That was a lot of numbers, but what it essentially amounts to is that actually using this ability is incredibly expensive. If you wanted to use 3 I-beams on one GM turn, which you could with Relentless 3, assuming they all hit, that's going to cost you 5 fear and 3 stress. That's nuts. A GM can only have a maximum of 12 fear, so this will rapidly drain any stockpile that you may have built. But even if you had the available fear, since at least that can be regenerated with relative consistency, you can only do that twice. Once they've used 6 I-beams, that's it. No more. The Gobstalker gets no way to recover stress, and adversaries on their own typically have no natural way to recover stress either. So, with all that out of the way, let's talk about the actual beams themselves, because they need to be incredible to justify that cost. First is Beguile. A target hit by this beam is beguiled and can no longer attack the Gobstalker. On top of that though, whenever anyone rolls with fear, the character must either mark a stress or attack their nearest ally with a standard attack. This effect only ends when they succeed on a knowledge or presence roll with a difficulty of 16, which is reasonably high. This can be an incredibly powerful way to get most of a party to max themselves out on stress and slowly kill each other. So yeah, this is pretty great. The second beam is Corrode, which deals 2d8 magical damage, which admittedly is not a whole lot, but it burns an armor slot without providing any benefit. though the player could still opt to use another armor slot to reduce the damage that they are taking. If they have none left, then the damage is doubled. I would imagine based on how this is worded that it isn't 4d8 damage, but rather 2d8 and you double whatever is rolled. This can be pretty good, not as immediately impactful as Beguile, but it certainly has its place. Next, our third beam is Doom, and this one is honestly pretty crazy. This requires the target to immediately mark all cleared hit points, so essentially, it instantly kills its target. Now, they do get the opportunity to mitigate the impact, not by spending armor slots, but instead by spending hope. They can reduce the amount of hit points they need to mark by 1 for each hope that they spend. This is brutal, since even if they don't die, they use a bunch of their hope to mitigate this damage, and then they probably don't have any left, or many more at least, to use their own abilities or to do it again if the Doom Beam hits a second time. Our fourth beam is Hypnosis, which takes the target out of commission for a bit. They only wake up if they are hit by an attack, mark 1 or more hit points, or succeed on a difficulty 16 instinct roll. This is also a pretty good option, though Beguile feels generally better and accomplishes a similar goal, though this does completely take the target out, whereas Beguile could still allow them to heal or assist allies, so it's definitely still very good. Paralysis is the fifth beam, and this makes the target vulnerable and restrained until they mark 2 stress. Vulnerable means all attacks against the target are made at advantage, and restrained makes it so that they cannot move. The vulnerable condition does make following up with subsequent I-beams particularly brutal, but mostly this is a great way to, at the very least, force a target to burn through some stress. The sixth beam is Petrify. This starts a countdown from 6, which ticks down whenever anyone rolls with fear. When it triggers, the target is turned to stone until the Gobstalker is defeated or the party takes a long rest. During that time, the petrified character is immune to all damage, but they are aware of their surroundings, but they also cannot take any actions. This is obviously a very strong effect, but does have the massive inconsistency of not knowing when it's actually going to trigger. The bigger the party though, the more likely this is to go off sooner. It is worth noting that there's no way to recover from this during combat, so if it does happen, it can be pretty devastating. Beam number 7 is Push, which aptly pushes the target up to far range, and they can take 3d6 physical damage from whatever it is that they hit. As a reminder, far is up to 100 feet away, which is pretty huge, but certainly not as impactful as some of the others. The 8th beam is Sear, which deals 2d8 direct magical damage. As a reminder, direct damage cannot be reduced by armor slots. This still feels kind of on the low side though. Next up, our 9th beam is Slow, which gives the target the vulnerable condition and requires them to mark a stress if they want to move. They can clear the effect at any time by spending 2 hope, which could be a fairly high cost, so it could be worth it in some instances. And finally, the 10th beam is Terrify. This prevents the target from taking any actions except for trying to run away or shake off the fear with a successful difficulty 16 insight roll. On top of that though, whenever the GM spends fear when a target is terrified, that terrified target must also mark a stress. One note about all of these beams is that none of them require reaction rolls. As long as the attack hits and the GM spends the required resources, the effects land. It should be pretty clear that after looking at all of these, that the intended goal of the Gobstalker isn't as much about killing the targets except for the Doom Beam, as it is about controlling the battlefield, terrifying its opponents, and ending the fight in other ways. The question we had earlier was whether the beams justify the incredibly high cost, and I think that for the most part, they probably do. That said, I still think something should be done, probably more on the stress side than on the fear side though. Maybe if it was free to target creatures within a close range but cost a stress to hit someone within far range, because otherwise, once 6 beams have been used, even if 0 hit, you're done. You're maxed out on stress, and that's it. This is a very cool creature that I think just needs a couple of small tweaks and it could be incredible. Moving on to tier 3, we're looking at the Chimera, which is classified as a bruiser. Bruisers in Daggerheart are intended to be hard-hitting, and they can also take a beating. They are generally frontline attackers ready to defend and destroy, and bruisers don't tend to have a lot of tricks up their sleeve when it comes to magic and control. It's usually more about sheer brutality. Chimeras here like to play with their food, metaphorically, but also probably literally. Stats-wise, their difficulty is 17, with thresholds at 22, 40, 9 hit points, and 5 stress. Stats-wise, this makes it among the strongest bruisers in tier 3. While they all have a difficulty of 17, all but one has thresholds at 2240. Its more standout stat here are its hit points being at 9, which is the second highest, and stress at 5, which is tied for the highest, so it's definitely a beefy boy. Its first feature is the passive Rending Jaws. This makes it so that in order to reduce damage by 1 threshold, the target must mark 2 armor slots instead of 1. This can escalate quite quickly, as the way that it's written implies that it does stack. So to reduce the damage by 2, it would cost 4 armor slots, and to go down by 3, it would cost 6 armor slots, which is insanely expensive, and no one's realistically going to do that. Next up is Breath of Fire, which requires a fear, but allows the Chimera to target up to 3 targets within close range. All targets need to succeed on a difficulty 20 agility reaction roll or take 3d12 magic damage. But even if you do succeed, you must still mark an armor slot or a stress. That's still a pretty brutal punishment for saving, especially when Rending Jaws can make you burn through armor slots pretty damn quickly. Next we have Serpent Strike, which is a reaction that triggers whenever the Chimera is attacked by a character within close range. Notably, it just needs to be attacked, it does not actually need to take any damage or mark any hit points. Using the reaction, the Chimera is able to mark a stress to attack the target back and deal 4d4 plus 10 physical damage and poison them until they rest or succeed on a difficulty 20 knowledge roll. While poisoned in this way, they need to roll a d6 before every action roll, and on a roll of 3 or lower, they need to mark a stress. This can be devastating, as stress can be an extremely valuable resource for many players, so providing a passive way to constantly drain it down can be super rough. And finally, it has Double Claw, which is also a reaction. This can be triggered after the Chimera makes a standard attack. Regardless of whether it hits or misses, it can mark a stress to make a second attack. That second attack can either be made against the same target or a different one. Overall, the Chimera is an incredibly powerful foe and can make up one insanely strong frontline. Between fire attacks and poisoning and constantly draining away armor slots, this guy is going to be tough. And finally, in tier 4, we have the Cephilith Priest, which is essentially a Mind Flayer. The Cephilith Priest was placed in the leader category. These creatures are not necessarily the strongest or don't necessarily have the best stats, but instead they tend to be the backbone of an encounter or even an entire campaign. They often provide buffs and bonuses to their allies and are typically the driving force behind the decisions that are made. One of the core mechanics that leaders often possess is the ability to spotlight their allies or buff them to create summons and other things like that. Looking at its stats, it has a difficulty of 20, thresholds of 37, 70, 7 hit points, and 5 stress. These are all pretty good and equal to that of the High Seraph, another tier 4 leader. As far as standard attacks go, it packs a punch with a plus 8 to hit and can target anyone within far range using its Psychic Strike, dealing 4d10 plus 10 magic damage. Looking at features, we've got 3. First is Psychic Blast. This lets the priest spend a fear to choose up to 3 targets that are within close range. They then need to succeed on a difficulty 20 knowledge or instinct roll. Failing that roll, all affected targets take 4d10 plus 10 direct magic damage and become vulnerable until they are spotlighted. If they succeed, they take 2d10 plus 5 direct magical damage. This is quite a powerful attack given that it can hit 3 targets, has a high difficulty, and deals direct damage, which again means that it cannot be reduced by armor. That's pretty hefty, all for the cost of just 1 fear. Next, it has Cerebral Suction, which also costs a fear and lets the priest select a vulnerable target within melee range and insert its tentacles into the target's ears, nose, and mouth. The target is then subjected to a strength reaction roll with a difficulty of 17, failing which they mark 1d6 stress, and the priest clears an equal number of stress that the target marks. I feel like this ability is a bit of a missed opportunity. It sounds so cool and is so terrifying and just marks a little bit of stress. Granted, 6 is definitely more than a little bit. It is thematic, but I feel like it could and probably should be a little bit more impactful. Gaining a way to recover stress is helpful, particularly for the final feature, Telekinetic Grasp. This lets the priest, after it succeeds with a standard attack, to mark a stress and restrain the target until they spend a hope to clear the condition. This is an interesting ability that does provide a way for the priest to serve as a constant drain on the target's hope as well. I think the Cephilith Priest is a great starting point, but it's lacking a lot of what makes leader stat blocks. There's nothing that directly impacts or buffs allies or gives any bonuses of any kind. Granted, it does have some abilities that can obviously be beneficial to its allies, like Psychic Blast leaving targets vulnerable, or Telekinetic Grasp restraining them, which should not be understated, but I would like to see them offer some more direct ally buffing abilities. I know we only have one Cephilith creature in this document, and there are none in the core rules, but I would hope that whatever book these are supposed to come out in, we get a bunch more Cephiliths that they can directly interact with each other. Overall, I think a lot of these monsters are fantastic additions to Daggerheart. Yes, they certainly derived a lot of inspiration from D&D, and I was kind of joking about that earlier, but it doesn't actually bother me at all. D&D doesn't have a monopoly on typical type fantasy enemies, even if this might be a bit on the nose sometimes. Daggerheart desperately needs more and a wider variety of adversaries, so I cannot wait to see this come out. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, which ones are your most or least favorite. Check out some of my other Daggerheart videos, but otherwise, take care.